Hello and welcome to Dialogue. In the latest escalation of Trump's trade war, Washington has imposed new tariffs ranging from 25% to 30% on 8 additional countries, including Algeria, Brunei, Iraq, Libya, Moldova, and the Philippines and Sri Lanka. Most striking, however, is a 50% tariff slapped on Brazil, justified by what Trump called concerns over freedom of speech in South America's largest economy. This comes on the heels of a broader move targeting 14 countries, including major economies like Japan and South Korea, with steep tariffs unless trade agreements are reached by August 1st. On top of that, Trump has announced a 50% tariff on copper imports and a staggering 200% duty on pharmaceuticals. What's driving this latest wave of trade threats? Can deals be struck before August 1st deadline? And what might be the domestic and the global consequences of targeting such critical sectors as metals and medicine? Join us for discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Wang Dan, China Director of Eurasia Group, Joan Pang, Senior Fellow of the Belt and Road Initiative Caucus for Asia Pacific, and former Malaysian government official, and Joseph Gregory Mahoney, Professor of Politics at East China Normal University. Well, Wang Dan, I will start with you. Explain to us what's driving this latest round of a trade threat against 22 countries here.
Well, there are competing theories for this, and I would buy in the theory that Trump is not being too serious. He is using this, of course, as a negotiation tactic, because after Liberation Day tariffs, he has rolled back most of the tariffs, and since then, there were different negotiations going on with different countries. And he also crashed the U.S. market right following the Liberation Day tariff announcement, and he cannot do that again. And based on the judgment, based on the performance of the bond and stock market in the U.S., it looks like that the markets buy in that he's not too serious about raising the tariff after August 1st.
Professor Mahoney, okay, actual tariffs for, not really actual, but anyway, adjusted, let's say, tariff on 22 countries, and also 50% on copper, about 200% on pharmaceuticals. What is the purpose here?
Well, I largely agree with Wang Dan, but I would add a couple of points. So, the first is that I've been getting messages from friends around the world. One just a few hours ago from Sri Lanka saying they got a letter too. It's almost a point of pride at this point. A strange sense of solidarity that comes from being noticed by the bully, which I guess is sometimes better than being ignored, especially when everyone else is getting hit too. Now, it does seem like this is part of a planned rollout. That there's some staging, and it's certainly aiming at political theater. But I think it's also encouraged by his frustrations with the BRICS meetings, especially some of the things that Lula said, his frustrations with the negotiations with Russia over Ukraine, and the sticking points that he's encountering with Japan. At the same time, I think he's also feeling the wind behind his sails a little bit with the recent success with the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. But I think that none of this is really unexpected. This is business as usual for him. That said, I think there is one thing here, though, that really sort of is a key illustration of how absurd all of this is. There was a letter sent to Libya yesterday. Libya, a country with a failed state, a country that imports, I think, $500 million from the U.S., a country that's a failed state largely because of U.S. interventions. And the U.S. is mainly buying energy from that country. So, I don't know what he expects. I don't know what sort of government is going to respond or negotiate. It's just like someone went down a list and saw, okay, well, there's a trade deficit with Libya. They get a letter too, even if there's no one there to receive it.
We're joined. I know Malaysia, where you are from, is also one of the 22 countries suffering from a possible 25–30% tariff from the United States. But given there is only like a couple of weeks left behind before the deadline, is it possible to finish the negotiation and reach a deal?
I certainly can't speak for the government on this, but they have already negotiated in what they thought was good faith and were fairly optimistic that their concerns had been heard, that there was, in fact, a kind of good faith negotiation going on. These tariffs imposed like that tend to undercut any sense in which good faith negotiations are possible. I mean, much as we might try to game it out right now and try to understand what the strategy behind this or the rationale behind this might be, what needs to be said is that the very notion of negotiations of any sort of fair trade, in fact, the very concept of tariffs and how they are evaluated, what they're for, are being quite radically undermined. So the entire language of it and the system by which these things are agreed to, the diplomatic protocols, the niceties, I think they tend to be undermined by this sort of behavior. It's extremely difficult in that sense for countries like Malaysia, which are extremely trade-oriented, but I'm sure for others as well. It's very difficult to try to understand why we are, and South Korea and Japan might wonder, as good allies of the United States, why they're in the same category now as, a more sort of independent, non-aligned ASEAN state like Malaysia.
Right, we'll talk more on that. But before we move on to the trade deals, Wang Dan, help us understand, in the letter published on the Truth Social, I talked about if you want to avoid these tariffs, you move your production to the United States. But what about the 50%, tariff on copper, the mineral? U.S. imports, extra tariff on that. So what's the purpose? Also industrialization or reindustrialization of copper production inside the U.S.?
Actually, the copper industry has been expecting 25%. Now it is 50%. So that alone would show that Trump is using this as a negotiation gesture rather than a true implication. There's room to roll back. There's a chance that he's just blunting this number out. It doesn't necessarily have to come to be implemented. And the U.S. is highly reliant on the copper import. About 50% of it is coming from Chile, Canada, and Mexico. So this is mostly a problem for the American continent. It doesn't really affect much for the rest of the world. And the tariffs cost will be fully bear by the American consumers. The affected companies would include a construction, an EV industry, the aluminum industry, but those industries also has pretty strong lobby power. So for Trump, there is the energy security meaning in it, and I think the ultimate goal is still to attract more investment back to the country rather than setting the real trade barriers.
Mm-hmm. Professor Mahoney, what about pharmaceutical, the drugs, generic or ingredients? That's not only about the business, it's also about the health of the American people. If there's a 200% extra tariff, that would be say beyond the means of a lot of Americans, I would say.
Sure, and this is an interesting development, one that will certainly raise eyebrows in Europe and India. And certainly undercut trade negotiations with those countries or regions. It would increase costs for American consumers who not only have to pay, if it comes to this, for reshoring, they'd have to pay for higher production costs. And it's not clear how it would impact U.S. pharma companies versus internationals. We saw Biden, for example, inducing Korean investment in the U.S. semiconductor industry, only to see those subsidies disappear with Trump and then tariffs imposed against Korea. So why would a non-American company take those risks? And finally, there are questions about FDA approvals. Could they be accelerated? And certainly these would be concerns for anyone worried about drug safety. But, I don't think Trump is too concerned about those things, if indeed this is a sincere policy, given the war that he's already waged against the government, his own government, through DOGE and other efforts.
Yeah, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty. The only thing we are certain is the it is uncertain, right? We still wait and see 200% whether that will become true. But anyway, back to John, you mentioned about Japan, South Korea. They are yet to reach deals with Washington. But Japan, the Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba said the Japanese government will avoid easy compromises. We are fully committed to negotiations while demanding what we should demand and protecting what we should protect. It seems Japan is determined to look for a fair deal. But do you think Trump will give them a fair deal?
As I tried to say earlier, I think the notion of negotiating and arriving at a fair deal is sort of upended by the manner in which these decisions are made. It's hard to see the relationship between negotiations and then the final tariff that you get. So there's little point then in sort of caving in at an early stage and then expecting that there are concessions. So this, I think Japan, like other countries, including I think Australia, now realize that they are in a new world in which they have to start thinking for their own interests. They have to start looking out for their own interests, not least in trade. This is for the long term.
Yeah,
it's not just a tactical matter with Trump, but they need to start doing this, and so that's very interesting.
So like a strategic, consideration, I guess. Like what happens to the South Koreans, for example. Their suggestion is like, their proposal is like a package deal. That includes not only economic interest consideration, but also security consideration, obviously referring to the U.S. Troops presence in the island. So they also suggest like the two leaders have a summit to finalize the negotiation between the two sides. But anyway, as you said, it's more than trade interests. It's about their relationship with the U.S. or their own position in this region, around the world, in this world. So there's a long-term impact, can we say so?
Indeed, a long-term impact. By doing it against the entire world simultaneously, I'm not sure that Trump or the U.S. strengthens its own hand, because everyone is looking at the other guy and saying, well, what kind of deals do you get for negotiating? What kind of deals do you get for being a loyal sort of ally or even a vassal? So there seems to be very little relationship between that and the particular moods and fancies of the president at the particular moment. This new 50% tariff on Brazil is a good example. Just because you have a political gripe with the government and the way it handled the previous president, that is not quite a reason, even in U.S. law, to raise a tariff. Presumably, he's doing all these on security and emergency type security considerations. The tariffs should lawfully go through Congress, the power to raise tariffs.
Right.
And the bypass is through a security interest. But these are clearly not security interests. So the entire world is looking at this, and I think they undermine their own position in this.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at some of the survey or analysis by, for example, World Travel and Tourism Council or Oxford Economics, the U.S. is expected to lose up, like $12.5 billion in tourism because of, trade war, because of the visa restriction for international students.
Yes, students
anyway,
as well.
One down, 50% on Brazilian export to the U.S. But actually, Brazil is suffering with a trade deficit with the U.S., right?
Yeah, this is exactly also the case for Singapore. They got this and very pissed off because it doesn't really fit the whole picture. It looks like Trump really wants to shrink the U.S. Trade deficit with the rest of the world. But when it comes to the implementation of tariffs, the true purpose seems to be wanting or coercing those countries to invest more into domestic manufacturing. And he wants to create jobs. So I don't think those countries would get anywhere without promising more projects, investment, greenfield investment in the U.S. Japan is a very good example. the Japanese negotiators got into it right after liberation and tariffs, but after 7 rounds, 3 months, nothing really is achieved, and they got 25% of tariff.
Right, Professor Mahoney. It's beyond trade vis-a-vis Brazil. It's interfering in the internal affairs of the country. It's a legal issue. The trial of the former President Bolsonaro, is that the business of the U.S.?
I think that's one issue that certainly would provoke Trump, but I would point more directly to the recent BRICS meeting that was hosted in Rio by President Lula. Lula has been struggling since the Biden administration and also with Trump. He has a coalition government with liberals in his coalition that have really tried to stay on the good side of the U.S. and resist tipping too far in the direction of what some people perceive as China. Now, what we did see over the past few days was Lula making some very strong statements that touched directly on issues that Trump is concerned about. For example, condemning what Israel is doing in Gaza and criticizing the attacks on Iran, and likewise pointing the finger at climate denialists, which I think we all understood to be pointing the finger at Trump. So it's interesting then that this is an issue that's been raised about freedom of speech, when precisely it was maybe Lula speaking his mind finally freely that maybe brought this retaliation from Washington.
Take a look at this ASEAN situation. John, out of the 22 countries for additional number of tariffs, 8 of them are ASEAN countries, including Malaysia, as we talked, the Philippines, the U.S. ally in this region, and Brunei, Laos, Myanmar, etc., Thailand, and also the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in this region for foreign minister meeting of ASEAN countries. I mean, in what way have we talked to, say, Malaysian officials?
It actually puts, I think, Rubio in a very weak position. And he will have little to do except lecture, which is the position that I think they wanted to disavow, that sort of posture, to go around lecturing people on their behavior and but they are forced to do that because these announcements have been made. I'm not sure what what grounds he has for engaging on any terms that might be acceptable, that might not be seen as bullying to the region. I think one can't underestimate the extent to which this undermines U.S. credibility long term,
right?
Whether on trade or on security in the region.
Right. Well, thank you all for the discussion. That brings us to the end of this segment.